Thanks to everybody for being here today. It's great to see you all. I can't quite see you all as well as I'd like to. But, I want to start, for a start, can you all hear me down the back?
Yes.
Can you understand the southern accent okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. How many refugees from Los Angeles here today? Yeah, a few, yeah, I understand. I just want to tell a story. I was in Los Angeles a while back, and I bought some food from a street vendor. And he gave me the change, gave me the product, and he said, you have an accent. Where are you from? I said, well, I'm from New Zealand. He said, well, where's that? So to make it really, really simple for him, I said, look, it's down south near Australia. He said, where Arnold Schwarzenegger comes from. It's easy to understand why they vote like they do in LA County. Sure. Well, people ask me all the time, why would I care about the United States? I've spoken to maybe 500 groups around your beautiful country. And I say there are two reasons. The first is gratitude. My country was facing invasion by the Imperial Japanese Army in World War II. And if it hadn't been for the huge sacrifice of your fathers and uncles and grandfathers at the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and Midway, we would have been done, folks. It's a very strong memory even today. And the second reason is related, but it's a little more selfish. Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope for mankind. If God forbid that if you ever lost your freedom, if you ever lose your liberty, your constitution, your economic dynamism, and your military superiority, all of which took a huge trashing through the Obama years. Had that continued, folks, it wouldn't be long before we were living in a world run out of Moscow and Beijing and Tehran and Havana. Is that the kind of world you'd like to leave to your children, people?
No.
So anybody who cares about liberty has to care about the United States. Now, my big deal is national security. As that's what got our good friend Don involved too. If you cannot protect your home or your business or your town or your country, what do you have? Doesn't matter how rich you are. If you can't protect it, it means nothing. And I talk about the side of national security that hardly anybody talks about, but it is the overriding part. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of ex-military in the room, maybe even serving military, and you've taken that famous oath to defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, right? And which are actually more dangerous? You got an enemy over there in a uniform with a gun pointing at you. That's bad enough. But an enemy wearing a suit and tie in your Congress working for someone else is even worse, is it not?
Yes.
Now, anybody in the room ever had to undergo any form of FBI background check or get a security clearance for a government or military position?
Wow.
Okay, you're talking nearly a quarter of the room, right? And judging by the look, I'm not sure if any of you would have passed, but look, is it? All jokes aside, is it true that those background checks are pretty rigorous? They check out your family background, your criminal history, overseas travel, bounce checks, everything. They'll interview your pastor, they'll interview your high school teachers, because they need to know you're a trustworthy person and will protect the Constitution. You imagine had Benedict Arnold been successful when he tried to betray George Washington during the Revolutionary War, how different your country may have been, how different your history would have been had that traitor succeeded. But what if you're a young Marxist radical Someone who hangs around the Workers' World Party, like, I don't know, like Raul Ruiz, for instance. You know? Or the Communist Party, like Barbara Lee and Karen Bass, or Nancy Pelosi, or Dianne Feinstein. And you get elected to Congress, where you may serve on the Homeland Security Committee, or the Armed Services Committee, or even the Intelligence Committee. How much of an FBI background check do you need for that one, folks? Zero. There are no background checks in Congress whatsoever. You think maybe the Chinese know about this, and the North Koreans, and the Cubans, and the Venezuelans, and the Communist Party. You think they know your congressmen have no vetting whatsoever, even to serve on the Intelligence Committee? And sure, but surely they wouldn't use that little weakness against you, would they? Okay, why did Mr. Ratcliffe, Trump's Secretary of Chief of Intelligence, say 2 days ago that the Chinese have blackmailed so many congressmen in this country and have so many under their thumb, they can dictate which legislation passes your Congress? They can determine, they can veto any legislation they do not like. That's Communist China today vetoing legislation in your Congress, according to Trump's Chief of Intelligence. And I've been saying this for years, folks. Don can attest to that. You have at least 100 members of your House and 25 members of the US Senate, including both of your California senators, who couldn't pass a background check to drive a school bus in this county. They wouldn't be allowed to sell you stamps at the post office or work in the Department of Agriculture. But they control every single major committee in your Congress: Homeland Security, Armed Services, Intelligence, Education, and Judiciary. Now, the FBI, I'll go back a bit, but you don't want to panic though, because you do have an organisation in your government whose job it is to root out and find spies and traitors and terrorists and prevent them getting power in your government, right? That's the FBI. Does that allay your fears? You're all right now? Once it would have. Once they were an excellent organisation, and many of the people in it are still excellent. But what is their leadership like, folks? It is not on America's side, I don't think. If you were an enemy, Diana West wrote a great book, The Red Thread, and she talked about the communist backgrounds of Comey, of Brennan, of Nellie Orr, all the key people in the anti-Trump conspiracy. All of them have communist backgrounds, many of them going back to the former Soviet Union. The deep state is essentially communist, folks. And that deep state is right through your Senate and right through your Congress, right into Sacramento, right into San Francisco. It has got tentacles all over your country. Now, the FBI is controlled by a group called it's controlled by the most powerful committee in your Congress, the Judiciary Committee. Okay, it controls oversees the FBI and the Justice Department. And the FBI is supposed to catch the bad guys, and the Justice Department is supposed to prosecute them. Well, how's that been working out? It has not. So, anybody remember the old congressman? He retired about 4 or 5 years ago, a man called John Conyers from Michigan. Yes. Okay, he was in Congress, I think, 140, 160 years in total. And for over 40 years, he was the Democratic head of the Judiciary Committee. He was the man who abolished your House Un-American Activities Committee, one of your last lines of defense against internal subversion. John Conyers had a 50-year history with the Communist Party USA, 40 years with Democratic Socialists of America, which is worse than the Communist Party USA, and 30 years with the Workers' World Party, which Raul Ruiz used to hang around with. These are the people who support North Korea and Cuba and Iran. And he's also a very big fan of several Muslim Brotherhood front groups. And if you're not sure who the Muslim Brotherhood is, they started out in Egypt in the late 1920s as a secret society with the goal of establishing an Islamic caliphate worldwide. And during World War II, they worked with the Nazis. And after World War II, they joined up with the KGB, the Soviet KGB, who taught them their tradecraft. They are the father of Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS, but in America they work legally through the Council on American Islamic Relations, Muslim Student Association, and many other groups, many of which operate in California. Now, when some of your Republican congressmen tried to get the Muslim Brotherhood designated as a terrorist organization, which it richly deserves, you can see in my movie here, John Conyers gets up and says, oh no, the Muslim Brotherhood are a peaceful social service agency now. We should work with them, not against them. John Conyers was a hardcore anti-American Marxist-Leninist. As hardcore as you can get, folks, yet for 40 years he oversaw your FBI. Also on the Judiciary Committee until recently, you had Judy Chu from the San Gabriel Valley, long-time supporter of the Communist Workers' Party, a militant pro-Chinese communist group. And you should see Judy Chu. You can check her out on C-SPAN. Whenever the FBI arrests one of the more than 25,000 Chinese spies currently working in this country, she gets on their case. You are racist, she says. You are a racist organization. You're only persecuting these people because you hate Asians. And she has arranged for sensitivity training for these cruel FBI agents so they don't persecute these poor Chinese spies any longer. Now recently Sean Hannity's been a little bit upset because you've got a socialist in Congress now, Ocasio-Cortez, a member of Democratic Socialists of America. How could this possibly happen, says Sean. Well, Jerry Nadler, the current head of the Judiciary Committee, the man who tried to impeach your president, has been an active member of Democratic Socialists of America, or a supporter, since 1977, folks. The man is a Marxist, yet he oversees the FBI and the Justice Department. Right now, the FBI is supposed to be going out there tracking down Black Lives Matter looters and rioters. Well, Jerry Nadler, a few years ago, got a woman sprung from jail. She was serving a 54-year jail sentence as an accessory to a terrorist murder, a membership of the Black Liberation Army and the Weather Underground. And Jerry Nadler got her out of jail, got her pardoned by Bill Clinton. She now serves on the finance arm of Black Lives Matter. So the FBI is trying to track down the people who are friends of their boss. Jerry Nadler is friends with the Black Lives Matter, friends with the communists and radicals, and the FBI is out there trying to track them down. How do you think they feel trying to prosecute the friends of their own boss? So the FBI finally wakes up. They haven't gone after congressmen for political crimes since World War II, if ever. They will go after them for corruption or bribery or kickbacks or real estate scams. They'll do that. But espionage, working for foreign countries, you've got a free pass. They don't touch you. So the FBI decides this has got to stop. There's at least 100 members of the Congress who are working with the Iranians, the Cubans, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Russians, the Communist Party, Muslim Brotherhood. They are bringing this country to its knees. We better do something. We better go to the Judiciary Committee. Mr. Nadler, Mrs. Chu, we need to investigate about 100 of your colleagues for working for the other side. Do you mind? And by the way, Mr. Nadler, Mrs. Chu, you're both on the list. Is that all right? How do you think that's going to go down, folks? You think they're going to go, what's going to happen to their budget next year if they start doing that kind of carry-on? You saw how the FBI dealt with Hillary Clinton. She was guilty as sin. Any one of you had done 10% of what she did, you'd be in jail for the rest of your lives. But they gave her a free pass because they were not going to go after the woman who might be the president and has power to destroy their agency and their jobs and their pensions. And knowing Hillary Clinton, maybe more than that. So if you're a young Marxist radical like Raul Ruiz, and I keep repeating his name because I think some of you know him, and you're in Congress, there's no media, there's no background checks, there's no media scrutiny, and the FBI doesn't dare to touch you. Nothing. I'll give you one more example. Again, he's in here. This is in this movie. That was seen by 3 million people on Amazon Prime until I took it down 2 weeks before the election. I wonder why. But anyway, it details the communist and Islamist infiltration of your Congress and Senate. And so this is the thing here of Andre Carson, one of your 3 Muslim members of Congress. And he's at a Muslim Brotherhood front convention in Connecticut in 2012. And he gets up in front of all the assembled people and he's got a big grin. And he says, "Hey, I've been told there's some spies here today. There's some people spying on us. They think we are here plotting to overthrow this country, plotting to destroy the US government." And then he laughs. He says, "Well, I say to you spies, I say to you people undercover, Allah will not allow you to stop us." This man currently serves on the Intelligence Committee overseeing the CIA, the NSA, the DEA, the FBI, all 16 of your intelligence agencies. The man should be being investigated by the Intelligence Committee, not serving on it. Every one of your key committees in Congress right now is run by a Marxist. Every single one. Homeland Security, Armed Services, Intelligence, the whole lot. And a similar situation exists in the Senate, and that's why we have to make sure we win those 2 Senate seats in Georgia. Otherwise, communists will control every major committee in the Senate as well.
What about Bill Barr?
Well, I'll talk about that later, man, but he's not exactly living up to expectations, is he? A lot of frustration with him. But okay, but that's the congressional level. My book here deals with the candidates who stood this year. Profiles 10 of the Democrat candidates. And isn't it great that finally the Democrats ran a moderate for president? Okay. Well, this is what the New York Times says. This is what the Washington Post tells us. Joe Biden's a moderate, old-fashioned Democrat. He tells his own people he's the most progressive candidate ever to run, but he tells us he's a moderate. Well, I want to tell you a couple of stories about Uncle Joe, right? I remember these even if he doesn't. Okay, so way back in 1972, Joe Biden was a 29-year-old city councillor in Wilmington, Delaware, and he decides to run for the US Senate against a 4-term Republican incumbent with an 80% approval rating. You think that would be a little bit of a suicide mission, right?
Yeah.
But he won. And he won because he had the backing of a very powerful and little-known group called the Council for a Livable World. Never heard of it? They've elected more than 200 of your senators and several of your presidents. The Council for a Livable World. Look up their website when you go home. Council for a Livable World. Well, the Council for a Livable World was founded by a man called Leo Szilard. He was an atomic scientist. He was part of a leading member of your Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic weapon you used to win the war against Japan. And he was a communist. He was a Hungarian communist, and they tried to fire him because they couldn't trust him but he was just too critical to the program. He was right up at the top levels. So after World War II, he starts working in politics, and he starts working for US disarmament. So he sets up this group called the Council for a Livable World in 1962, and it's a PAC. And this is their strategy, very simple. We'll get some money and we'll start electing far left senators in very small states. Because you can elect a senator in Delaware or New Rhode Island or Vermont or Maine way cheaper than you can in California or Texas, right? So they did that, they started doing that. And this was a quid pro quo. We will elect you, we will fund you, we will help getting you re-elected, we will give you guidance, recommend staff for you. All you've got to do is destroy the US military. That's your job. You've got to work to gut the US nuclear armaments. You've got to cancel weapons systems. You've got to negotiate bad treaties with the Soviet Union, which give them an advantage. That's your job. Well, it turns out in 1994, a former Soviet intelligence officer named Pavel Sudoplatov wrote his memoirs, in which he named Leo Szilard as a fully recruited Soviet agent. And more than that, he said that Beria, Stalin's secret intelligence chief, had told Szilard to stop his spying because the FBI was on his case. Instead, work in politics for US nuclear disarmament. If we can disarm the US, the Soviet Union will run the planet. That was the rationale. So Leo Szilard sets up the Council for a Livable World. Well, the man who actually personally recruited Joe Biden was the president of the Council for a Livable World at the time, a man called Albert Gore Sr. Okay? Some of you may have heard of his son. He invented the internet and global warming. That's the man. Well, Albert Gore Sr. got Biden the money, recruited him, got him a whole bunch of Democratic support, got a whole bunch of endorsements, got a whole bunch of volunteers, poured them into Delaware, and they won. But it turns out that Albert Gore Sr. was a protege of a man called Armand Hammer. Some of you have heard of him. He was the head of Occidental Petroleum. He was the leading American Soviet agent of the early 20th century. The man who kept the Bolshevik Revolution alive, a friend of Lenin. Joe Biden owes his job to two bona fide Soviet agents. And he has worked in the interests of the Soviet Union, Russia, Iran, and China his entire political career. In the 70s, he's a moderate, right? In the 70s, there were three real radical senators who opposed Reagan every step of the way. It was Biden, Ted Kennedy, and John Kerry. And now Biden is bringing Kerry back from the dead and wants to give him a big position in his administration. Who is John Kerry, folks? He's basically Jane Fonda with less testosterone. So, again, I've got Joe Biden at the 50th anniversary of the Council for a Livable World on tape, and he says, I'm here to thank the council. You got me elected. You funded me. You helped me. You guided me when I was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You are with me every step of my career. You helped me and Obama, also a council recruit. You helped me and Obama negotiate the START treaty with Russia. The treaty that was so good for Putin and so bad for us that President Trump had to unilaterally cancel it. As I said, Joe Biden would be one of the biggest traitors to ever serve in the US Senate, and that is saying something. Well, Donald Trump recently said that if Joe Biden becomes president, again, God forbid, this country will become owned by China. And he couldn't have picked a better running mate to help him than Kamala Harris. Okay? Now, Kamala Harris Another moderate, according to the Washington Post, a pragmatic moderate Democrat whose voting record just happens to be to the left of both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. But she's a moderate Democrat, okay? Well, moderate compared to what? Well, Kamala Harris, her father was a Jamaican economist, her mother was an Indian cancer researcher. They met in Berkeley, got married, and they're involved in radical politics. They're involved in the Afro-American Association, which supported Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. That group split, and two members of it formed the Black Panther Party, the pro-Chinese terrorist communist group, and the model for today's Black Lives Matter. Her father actually was an affirmative action Marxist at Stanford University. In the 70s, the Stanford Economics Department didn't have enough Marxists, right? Can you believe that? So they recruited Don Harris as the best Marxist they could find to fill the position. So then Kamala Harris, she's a student radical at Howard University, big time protester and all this. She comes back to San Francisco and gets involved in the law and politics. And she has an affair with Willie Brown. And this is a big scandal at the time. He became mayor of San Francisco. He was the chief of the Senate in the California Senate, I believe. Big time Democrat. And it was a big scandal because he was 60 and she was 30. And he was still technically married and the tongues were wagging, And he gave her a couple of jobs that gave about $400,000 over 5 years for one meeting a month, those kind of things. But nobody says this. Willie Brown was a major communist and still is. He was heavily involved in the Communist Party in the 60s. He worked in the same communist circles that Dianne Feinstein was active in. He was still supporting the Communist Party with his name publicly well after his affair with Kamala Harris. And now he and Dianne Feinstein basically serve as China's best friends in the Bay Area. They've turned San Francisco over to the Chinese, effectively. Kamala Harris, her husband's law firm deals heavily with communist China. They've got Communist Party members on the staff. But the man who got her into politics is a very interesting character called Stephen Phillips. Now, Steve Phillips was a young black law student at Stanford in the 80s. He was a member of the League of Revolutionary Struggle, a pro-Chinese communist group. And he was very good friends with a fellow young Marxist radical called Maya Harris, Kamala's sister. And so they formed a little set. They were friends. Well, Steve Phillips leaves Stanford, moves into the Democratic Party, as did most of the League of Revolutionary Struggle, and he marries into a very wealthy family in San Francisco. Who remembers the old Golden West Savings and Loan? Okay. Well, that was run by the Sandler family. They sold it to Wachovia, bankrupted Wachovia, but they pulled $2.2 billion profit out of the sale. And Steve Phillips has been using that money to buy himself access to the top reaches of the Democratic Party, to promote candidates, promote ballot measures, worked very closely with George Soros and other billionaires, and create havoc in America. When Kamala Harris went to run for Attorney General, DA in San Francisco, it was with Steve Phillips' money, Steve Phillips' guidance. When she stood for Attorney General in California, Steve Phillips was right behind her. When she, I'll go back a little bit, just set the scene. In 2008, see what Steve Phillips does, he used to be part of Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition. And that was a Maoist communist operation. And it was all about getting the progressive whites and the brown people and the black people and the gays with the lavender stripe and the Asians with the yellow stripe, the Native Americans with the red stripe. This is their terminology, not mine. And you create a rainbow coalition of minorities. And you get all the minorities to win the election. And this is what he did in 2008. He got $10 million together and ran big voter registration drives in 17 southern states amongst black and Latino communities. And that's what got his very, very good friend, Barack Obama, ahead of Hillary Clinton. Steve Phillips elected Cory Booker, his Stanford friend, to the Senate from New Jersey. He was behind Stacey Abrams, who almost a communist, who almost won the governorship of Georgia, and Andrew Gillum, another communist, who almost won the governorship of my state in 2018. But Kamala is his crowning, she is his new protege. He got her into the Senate, and now he's engineering to get her into the White House. Steve Phillips got Maya Harris's husband, Tony West, and is number 3 in the Justice Department. Now he's trying to get Tony West into the Attorney General's position. This is a Maoist coup we are undergoing, folks. These people are pro-Chinese communists. Kamala Harris owes her entire career to pro-Chinese communists. And that's what is going on. Now, talking of China, we are at war with China now. We are in World War III with China right now. And I want to say how that's been playing out recently. In May 2019, President Trump put tariffs on Chinese goods. And the response of China, according to the Xinhua news agency, was to declare people's war on the United States. Now people said, oh yeah, that means they're going to put some tariffs on American goods. Maybe they'll shut down a couple of American businesses. Yeah, blah, blah, nothing to worry about. People's war is a term from Mao Zedong. What it means is this. It is every method of warfare to destroy your enemy before your armies even march. In the old days when Mao was taking over China, he would flood the enemy territory with counterfeit money to destroy their economy. He would propagandize the enemy troops. He would send drugs into the enemy soldiers' camps. You destroy your enemy before your soldiers even march. Well, people's war. What evidence is that we're in people's war right now? Well, all of the above. The first major warning should have been COVID. We know that it was, according to a French Nobel Prize winning biochemist, it was genetically engineered. We don't know it was deliberately released, but the timing was incredibly suspicious. It was just after Trump had been caning the Chinese on trade, after he'd supported the Hong Kong protesters, after he'd stood with the anti-communist presidential candidate in Taiwan, and after and it came just in time for election year. Right? You got to understand, the Communist Party of China is 800 families, right? It's like a mafia that controls that country. If the Communist Party can be isolated and defunded and sanctioned, they will lose so much face and so much power, their own people will take them out. The Communist Party of China knows that if Trump gets another term, he will do to them what Reagan did to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. So they understand, which is an urgent reason to make sure he is re-elected. Well, he is re-elected. Make sure he's confirmed, inaugurated. So, you imagine if Trump could do that, if he could, because he's already working on alliances with Japan and Indonesia and all the countries circling China. If he can take down the Communist Party of China, imagine how different the world would be. Imagine all that energy, all that enterprise, all that culture turned towards good rather than harnessed towards evil. Imagine the difference it would make to the country. That's what's at stake here, folks. This is the whole world balance of power depends on this election. Because right now the Indians are freaking out, the Japanese are freaking out, the Taiwanese, the Koreans, because they have a friend in the White House who will help them stand against China. What if they have someone in the White House who is an agent of China? What are they going to do? It's going to make a whole difference. Just another diversion. New Zealand is freaking out too, right? Australia's freaking out. A few years ago, a top Australian trade official went to China, and they had talks up there, and a top Chinese general, this is what he said to him publicly: Australia needs a godfather. And just by the way, if you don't know where Australia is, okay, it's a small island off New Zealand's west coast. But he said, Australia needs a godfather. Will it be an American godfather or a Chinese godfather? If you are smart, you'll choose China, because we are the growing power in the region. How do you think that made us feel when Obama was gutting the 7th Fleet? When the Chinese were building 60 warships a year and Obama was building 9. So the world's freaking out. So we hear about this disease, right? The Wuhan Virus. Well, in January this year, we know that they deliberately spread it. They banned internal air travel, but they kept international air travel open. Every year in Wuhan, they have a New Year's celebration, lasts for a whole week. And Chinese come from all over the world, party up. It's like Mardi Gras. And this week, the Chinese Communist Party, this year, the local authorities asked the Chinese Communist Party, should we shut it down so as not to spread the disease? And the Communist Party said, no, it goes ahead. So Chinese came from California, from Canada, Australia, France, Italy. They partied up and socialized for a week, and they all went back, and the disease was everywhere. Well, normally, in a pandemic or an epidemic, the proper course of action is you quarantine the sick, and everybody else takes precautions and goes about their business. But we were told we could not do that this time because the World Health Organization said there was evidence of asymptomatic transmission, meaning people without symptoms, thank you, Dawn, people without symptoms were transmitting the disease, and as we didn't have proper testing, we were going to have to shut down everybody, or we're going to have 2 million dead Americans by Christmas. So Trump was faced with the position, if I don't follow their advice, Fauci's advice, I'm going to get blamed for every dead grandmother between now and election day. He was backed into a corner. Well, we've got to understand the World Health Organization is led by Mr. Tedros. Mr. Tedros is an Ethiopian. And if you look at his CV, he's a former leader of that country's pro-China, Marxist-Leninist Communist Party. The guy's completely in China's pocket. Now, recently, Tucker Carlson had a very interesting gentleman on his show, a man called Brian Dean Wright, a Democrat and a former CIA officer. And he said this. He said, my party, I'm so embarrassed to say, is following the Chinese line over COVID. Shut down, shut down, shut down. And Tucker says, why are they doing this? He said, well, some of them are useful idiots, but some of them have got to be paid Chinese agents, which is exactly what Ratcliffe is now telling us. And they've got a common enemy. The Chinese hate Trump, the Democrats hate Trump. What's Trump's biggest strength? It's his economic policies, right? What if we take that away from him? What if we destroy the economy? That'll fix him. So all the blue states followed the Chinese line, shut down everything, make life difficult for businesses, shut down churches but not casinos, all of the stuff you've seen. But because it will wreck the economy, and this was the plan. But there's an even more sinister part of this. It goes right to survival of this country. Barack Obama did more damage to your military than any other president in history. Cancelled weapon systems, horrible rules of engagement in Afghanistan and Iraq, the transgender policy. He got rid of about 200 good generals and replaced them with Democrat hacks. Did massive damage. And so meanwhile, China and Russia are building up like crazy. So Trump gets into power and understands if he doesn't do something real quick, we're going to be facing war and we'll probably lose. So he gets rid of the transgender policy, boosts morale, ups the military budget. Perfect, just what he should be doing. But he can only do that on the back of a strong economy. What happens to your military budget when your economy's in the tank? And already 31 Democrats, led by the pro-communist, she's been to Cuba 22 times, Barbara Lee from Northern California, has written a letter to the Armed Services Committee demanding big defense budget cuts in the next budget go around because of the damage COVID has done to our economy. So if they are successful, and this is what Biden will be pushing, folks, I believe he will cancel your intercontinental ballistic missile program, one of the last things keeping you safe at all. If he does that, if he cuts your military, who runs the world from that point?
China.
That's what we're looking at here, folks.
What do we do?
Well, there's a few suggestions coming up, but I'm trying to lay it out here because I think most of our sides still don't realise what's at stake here. They see things only in American terms, not in global terms. We got to look at the global balance of power here. Because that's going to have big implications on our future, on our trade, even keeping alive, folks. So, we're just starting to recover from the COVID, well, some states are, and we're starting to reopen, and people are going to restaurants. We get hit with week after week of mass rioting, all because George Floyd got killed in Minneapolis, right? No, it's absolute garbage, absolute lie. That rioting was completely controlled by a group called the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. And guess, they're a communist party, and guess which communist country they support? China. Okay, they're totally in the tank for China. Now, the day that Trump was inaugurated, the leader of Freedom Road, a woman called Steph Yorick, publicly declared at a rally in Washington, D.C., that their job was to be in the streets for 4 years and bring down Trump by making this country ungovernable. Direct quote. In 2019, her organization set up a group in Chicago called the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. And it was all about countering police brutality, countering white racism. This group tried to start the riots when the jogger was killed in Georgia. They tried to start the riots when a young black woman was killed in Louisville, Kentucky, but it didn't spark. George Floyd was the jackpot because that was right in their home base and it was so public. And the woman who started the riots and organized it was Steph Yorick's wife, Jess Sundin. I've got her on tape boasting about how she organized this, how she was working 20 hours a day organizing these demonstrations from the minute the man was killed. I have made it public. I've got it out there all over the place. I'll send a link to Joy and she can send it around to you ladies. And she speaks of the joy she felt. The joy she felt seeing Precinct 3 burn to the ground. And the absolute necessity, the integral part that the violence and the looting played in the protests. This was not peaceful protests hijacked by radicals. This was pro-Chinese communists trying to burn your country down right from the start. Right from the start. They are the same people who burned Kenosha. They burned East LA. They burned some stuff in the Bay Area. They attacked Houston and Dallas. They attacked Salt Lake City. They attacked Tallahassee, Tampa, Jacksonville, St. Petersburg, and Port. No, that was done by another group because the people. There's two pro-Chinese communist parties, Freedom Road, who burned a whole bunch of stuff, and another group called Liberation Road that used to be part of Freedom Road but split away. They burnt the rest. And Liberation Road has a very strong front group in this country that some of you may have heard of, that's called Black Lives Matter. Okay? Black Lives Matter is completely run by Liberation Road, which is a pro-Chinese communist party. This idea that 3 young black chicks You know, they were all upset about Trayvon Martin being killed, and the police were hunting black kids for sport. You know, Patrice Kalu's, Opal Tometi, Alicia Gaza, and they just happened to think of a hashtag and it just happened to go viral. It's all complete lies. This is a very, very planned communist program. Very deeply planned. And you got Republicans taking a knee to these people. You got churches giving them money. You got massive corporations giving them money. The first trial run was Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. That was completely run by Liberation Road. They burnt that city to the ground. They are very active. Their headquarters is in the Bay Area. And in the Bay Area, there's a group called the Chinese Progressive Association, which has been there 40 years. It runs San Francisco politics. It does voter registration, community organization, and you can't get elected to anything in San Francisco without their blessing. And it's completely upfront for communist China. Now, the Chinese Progressive Association started a little group to help Black Lives Matter called Asians for Black Lives. They wrote Black Lives Matter manual. They fund Black Lives Matter. They guide Black Lives Matter. And one of their top guys is a man called Alex Tom, who was the CEO of the Chinese Progressive Association. And I'll send some tapes round because I've got him on tape saying, we are the co-conspirators of Black Lives Matter. We are in support of China. We have deep relations with the Chinese consulate. I run my positioning past the Chinese officials. Our job is to defend China and bring down Trump. It's a complete Chinese operation, folks. And guess what? The same group, the Chinese Progressive Association, also has a network in about 12 states, but they focus really heavily on 7 states this year. They have a network of voter registration organizations. They've got one in Michigan, one in Wisconsin, one in Pennsylvania, one in Georgia, one in Arizona, one in Florida, and one in North Carolina. Gee, were those the key states in the election, folks? Well, they started a group called, this Chinese Progressive Association started a group called See the Vote. And they were organizing these voter registration drives in all of these key states, and they claimed credit openly for flipping 6 of them for Biden by signing up hundreds of thousands of minority voters. In Arizona, they talk about how they did 8 million phone calls and knocked on 1 million doors in Arizona. They claim they flipped Pennsylvania. They claim they moved 40,000 votes in Wisconsin. Trump won it by 20,000, then Biden allegedly wins it by 20,000 this time. They didn't really win them. What they did was lift the Democratic Party vote enough so that the vote fraud, which they had already pre-planned, wasn't going to be quite so noticeable. But they blew it because the Trump vote was way above what they expected. They panicked and just dumped truckloads of ballots in after midnight, which was easy to detect and gives us a glimmer of hope in overturning this. But this is a Chinese operation. The Chinese are working elections in our states. The Iranians, their friends, helped to flip 3 districts in California in 2018. We got 2 of them back. You know, Harley Rowder, we got rid of, who's the other one? Gil Cisneros. We got rid of him too. But the model for this voter registration organization is a group called New Virginia Majority. They've been going since 2007. Remember when Virginia was a red state? Very deeply red state, okay? Well, now it's blue. This is just because of demographics, right? You know, it's just, who knows how this happened? Well, it happened because the Republican Party in that state was very complacent, for a start. But this is how they actually did it. New Virginia Majority is controlled by Liberation Road, the pro-Chinese communists. The man in charge is a man called John List, an old Maoist. They started in 2007. They wear orange t-shirts, you know, like Acorn used to do. They work like Acorn, signing up tens of thousands of minority voters. They've signed up over 300,000 minority voters in the last 10 years, and they worked with Terry McAuliffe, the governor of that state, very closely to legalise 200,000 felons to also vote. That's what flipped Virginia. And the reason they are so efficient in their targeting is they use very sophisticated GIS computer mapping. Every precinct in Virginia is mapped out in the tiniest detail. And they know where the Ethiopians live. They know where the Iranians live. They know where the Sri Lankans live. And they target those districts, micro-targeting. And that's how they manage to do it. And those maps don't grow on trees. They're produced under contract by a Liberation Road communist who is a geography graduate from George Washington University. But guess where he's been working for the last 10 years? Guess where he uses the equipment to make the maps to flip states, flip Virginia, and work on other southern states? It's out of the Wuhan University Geography Department, China. All good things come from Wuhan, right? This is a concerted Chinese attack on your country. This is people's war. So this is what they've done. They're killing 30,000 of your kids every year with fentanyl, right?
Yes.
They are stealing your technology like no tomorrow. They're indoctrinating your kids through their control of Hollywood and through their Confucius Institutes. They're buying up your business and real estate and infrastructure. They are hacking your companies, stealing their secrets. Now they have wrecked your economy with a virus they deliberately spread. They've burnt cities all over America, started massive race riots, and now they're stealing an election right from under your very noses. But there is one bit of good news. You can buy cheap toasters in Walmart. This is the deal you were given, folks. This is the deal Kissinger sold you. We'll be friends with China. We'll send all our industry to China. We'll play them off against the Russians, and they'll become like us. And we'll build them up, and they'll be just like us, and we'll all be friends together. All we got to do is give up our industry, forget about national security, and build up China. What a great deal. So you ship all your industry to them, you lose millions of jobs in America, they poison your kids, they wreck your economy, they steal your secrets, they're building up their military to destroy you, but you can buy cheap crap at Walmart. That's the deal you got. You buy cheap toasters that last 6 months when you could have bought a good toaster that lasted 3 years, built by an American. That's the deal you got. And this is the deal that was in place right up to President Trump. And President Trump is the only president in many, many years who saw through this treason, saw through the folly of this approach, and actually did stuff about it. Why do you think they want to take him out, folks? You know, Trump recently put 180 Chinese companies on a roster. No American business can deal with these companies anymore because they are all working for the Communist Party or the People's Liberation Army. He has banned exchanges. Chinese students can no longer study at MIT and other sensitive institutions. He's arrested more Chinese spies under his watch than any president for decades. He has done more to counter China, the Communist Party, than anyone else by a country mile. Recently, and you don't hear about this in the news, but recently, one of your big companies, one of your big pension funds, was going to invest American military pensions into Chinese companies associated with the People's Liberation Army. They were going to send American servicemen's money to companies to build weapons to kill them. And Trump vetoed it. You're starting to understand why the Chinese are trying to bring him down, folks. He's the only thing standing between them and running this planet, effectively. They put everything into this election. This is not the Democrats who tried to steal this election. This is the Democrats guided by the Chinese that helped steal this election. It's that critical. So what do we do about all this, people? Well, the obvious answer is two immediate things. We've got to keep the pressure up. We've got to keep rallying, keep the public opinion going to push these court cases and things right through to the end. We've got to make sure Trump has got a very strong legal case in many of these states. The only thing we've got to worry about is cowardly judges and cowardly state legislators who won't do the right thing. That's why we need to keep the public pressure high. It's why we need to keep wearing our Trump hats, flags, holding rallies, sign waving, act like we're still campaigning, because we still are. There's a big rally in Beverly Hills right now doing that. There's going to be a big MAGA rally in Washington very shortly. And any spare time you've got, if you're not doing that, you need to get involved in those 2 Georgia Senate races. There's already Republican volunteers from California going over there now. This is critical, folks. You know, the Democrats have just got the House by a very few, but if they get the White House and they get the Senate, everything just gets rammed through. But if we've got the Senate, we've at least got some measure of control and some way of slowing things down. It's critical. I'll take questions in a minute, man. So we've got to do those immediate things. That's just right in front of us, very obvious. What are the long-term answers here? Well, we have to get back to a national security state, folks. We've got to put, this is what I'm suggesting that Trump does very soon. When he gets re-elected, this is the first thing he's got to do. He's got to set up a new agency. He's got to recruit former top intelligence officers who've been out of the service for 10 years at least, before Obama, and he gets some new trusted recruits and form a new agency. Then this is what he does. He institutes a 3-month amnesty program for foreign agents. This is how they took down the mob in New York. This is what Giuliani did. You have got thousands of foreign agents working in this country. They're corrupting your businessmen, your politicians, they're stealing your secrets, they're infiltrating your institutions. They're Iranians, they're Chinese, they're Russians, they're Russian mafia, they are Mexican cartels, they are Venezuelans, there'll probably be at least 100,000 running around your country right now, easily. And they get no pushback. So Trump puts an amnesty on. You've got 3 months. You turn yourself into my new agency and you'll be granted immunity. You will even be granted witness protection if necessary to stay in this country, as long as you turn over all of your networks to us. As long as you expose everything you know. And if you don't expose everything and we find out later, because somebody else tells us, all protections are off. So you can turn yourself in. You know, we know you can turn yourself in, you can stack shelves in Idaho for the rest of your life, but you'll live. You won't go to jail as long as you turn everything in. This would completely throw every foreign network in the country into complete chaos. Every Chinese spy who went to meet with the senator would be wondering, are they wearing a wire? Have they already flipped? Are they working for the feds? It would paralyze them. And the other thing is, if you don't turn yourself in 3 months, then you go to jail for 30 years in Livable. So you've got a choice. Every foreign agent, every corrupt businessman, every corrupt politician, you've got 3 months to turn yourself in. But you've got to spill your guts. So you would have people coming in, but see, the enemy wouldn't know who's turned himself in and who hasn't. So their whole networks are paralyzed. And this is what they did with the mafia in New York. This is what Giuliani did. See, the old way in New York, the cops would arrest a low-level mafia guy. And Guido could easily do 5 years in jail. He wouldn't worry. He'd do 5 years, he'd keep his mouth shut, he wouldn't turn on the bosses, they would look after his family, he'd come out and get back into mob activity. But when they started putting in 30-year sentences by heroin, Guido was facing 30 years. And Guido had a choice. You tell us everything you know and go into witness protection, or you spend the rest of your life in jail. What are you going to do? And they started to flip. And they'd flip some, and they would flip on more. And it went up and up the chain until the New York Mafia was paralyzed. And this is what we have to do with foreign agents in this country. Look, we can reform the taxes, we can reform education, we can do everything. If we don't get the foreign agents out of our system, it's all for nothing, because they will eventually win. But we do that, then we can start doing things like, we can start putting pressure on Trump. How about we get rid of the Department of Education, Mr. Trump? Right? How about we start returning all education back to local level, Mr. Trump? Wouldn't that be a great idea? Wouldn't that be fantastic for your kids? Trump has taken this country out of 2 United Nations bodies. Mr. Trump, you can see what a bunch of scumbags the UN is. Let's get right out of it all together, okay? And I think second term Trump would do that. You know, the whole raft of things that can be done. Look, Trump is primed ready. You think what he'd be like the second term with the Senate, with a very, with a minority in the House that could be altered. He'll be unleashed, people. He wants to leave a legacy and stick it to the enemies of this country like you wouldn't believe. He'll do it. And he will do it because he won't be facing another election, and he'll go for broke. Absolutely for broke. That's why it's so critical we've got to go through this and make sure he's elected. Because if he isn't elected, even if Biden doesn't do the horrible things I think he will do, nobody will ever trust another election in this country's history. And a lot of people will either go extreme and violent, or they'll give up on politics altogether.
That's my question. How do we know in the Georgia Senate? How do we know that election's going to not be stolen?
Yeah,
that's the question.
I know. I'll get to that in a minute, mate, ma'am. Look, we don't look, say Trump wins this. See, I think the 2016 election was a miracle. I think it was a gift from God. And we sort of hoped it would be the same this time round, because I know you worked pretty darn hard for it. But it didn't come out clean. But you imagine when Trump wins this. For years we've been saying the Democrats are cheap, they're dishonest, they're crooks. And the media says, where's your proof, where's your proof, where's your proof? Well, when Trump wins this, we will have the proof. It'll be right there in black and white for all to see. The whole world knows it, and we'll prove it to the world. That will give the opportunity for every Republican state legislature in the country and the federal government to institute extremely tough anti-fraud legislation. That will destroy the Democrats for 30 years, folks. They'll be done. We will have a transformation in this country. You imagine Trump wins again. You'll see the Chinese Communist Party rocked. You'll see them lose their grip. You'll see freedom revolutions start up in Latin America and Europe. You'll see a whole change in the world balance of power. You'll see a great increase in this economy. Because right now, a lot of business people are sitting on their checkbooks, right? Am I going to invest $1 billion under President Biden? No thanks. He'd be like President Obama, only worse. So when Trump wins, the checkbooks will come open. Money will come into the economy, not just from this country, but from other countries. The border will be closed, so American workers don't have to compete with illegal immigrant labor. And the American worker will be on the pig's back. There'll be jobs everywhere, high-paid jobs everywhere. The Bernie kids can move out of their mom's basement and actually get married, get high-paying jobs, have families, and forget all about socialism. Right? All of these things are possible, but we gotta hang tough. I know you're tired, folks. I know how hard you've worked. You ladies and gentlemen, you spend your whole spare time writing out checks, going to meetings, putting up yard signs, phone banking, running around all over the place, putting hours and hours and hours and hours into the cause for two reasons. Tell me if I'm wrong. Because you love your country and you love your kids. Is that why you do it?
Sign up again.
Yes, put your sign up again. Mine's never come down. I got 5 signs in my property and they ain't coming down till this is settled, people. Maybe not even then. But, so this is where we're at. I'm asking you to double down, ladies. I know you thought you'd get a break now. But this is critical time. This is a critical time here now. We've got to keep going, show support for the president, keep sending money to his legal efforts, keep showing your support. He needs it. Keep tweeting and Facebooking. Don't care what the Dems say. Just keep it up because we need the public support. This is the time. And if you think that's tough, I want you to think back a couple of 100 years. Sure, you don't remember it, but your ancestors, right? Your ancestors were running around the forests of this country with squirrel rifles, fighting the world's greatest military empire. They were chased across every state. They lost almost every battle. They weren't paid for months. They were freezing in the snow, dodging British bullets, eating berries to survive, away from their families for months at a time. And sometimes, if they did get to go home, all they would find would be a burnt-out farmhouse and some graves. And they did that for year after year after year. I was in Morristown, New Jersey 2 weeks ago. That's where your troops spent the winter of 1780. And that was the little ice age. That was freezing. 10,000 troops started that winter. Death, desertion, and disease took 4,000 of them. They weren't paid for months. The farmers hated them because they stole every chicken within 20 miles to survive. The troops were eating their own boots. The officers were slaughtering their pet dogs to survive. But they went through that winter. And then George Washington got down on his knees and he prayed at Valley Forge, folks. And he got up and he went on to take the British out in a surprise attack at Yorktown, and he turned the course of the war. And not just the war, world history. You imagine the bleak, horrible place this world would have been for the last 200 years without America, folks. Well, we're at that time now. I'm not asking you to dodge British bullets. I'm not asking you to go away for months at a time. I'm asking you to double down on what you're already doing. Double down, get people involved, keep fighting, get involved in the Georgia election, everything that's right in front of us. And I'll talk a minute about that Georgia election. This is the time. This is all I can promise you, folks. I can't promise you what's going to happen, but I can promise you 2 things. If we blow this God-given opportunity, we have only ourselves to blame if our children live in slavery. If we give it everything that's within us, everything that we can for our God, our country, and our kids, 2 things may happen. One, we may give it everything we've got, and maybe we still lose. It's always possible. But at least you'll all earn the right to look your children in the eye and say, I did everything I possibly could for you. And what is that worth to you, folks? And if you win, and you absolutely can win this, people, that 2016 election proved to me that God is not finished with this country yet, folks. You win this, you will spark an economic boom like you've never seen. You will spark a liberty boom, not just in this country. You will set the stage for a long overdue spiritual revival in this country. And you will all earn the right to pass on to your children, not just the amazing country that you inherited, but one even greater. Is that worth fighting for? So I want to say to all of you, thank you so much for what you do for America and for my country and for liberty. God bless America, and God bless California, and God bless the GOP. Thank you very much.